Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Fort Wayne Metals Absorbable Metals webinar today. I'd like to welcome the audience and thank you for participating in the Absorbables webinar. I'm going to do some quick introductions before we get started. I'm Anthony Gutierrez. I'm the Global Sales Manager for our international team, and I've been with Fort Wayne Metals about a year, and I look forward to working with everyone. Today's webinar will be conducted by Adam Griebel. He's a senior engineer at Fort Wayne Metals. He's led the development of absorbable metals and advanced process technology since 2012. Adam is active in ASTM and ISO and leading the effort to bring useful standards to the absorbable metal field. In this upcoming webinar, Adam is going to walk you through a few things. Firstly is what are absorbable metals, a little bit about the current market for absorbable metals, and finally, some of Fort Wayne Metals' current offerings and how they can support end products. As a reminder, you can submit any questions in the Q&A section. We'll do our best to address those questions either during the event or at the end, depending on the nature of the questions. And just as a reminder, all questions are anonymous. So feel free to use the Q&A chat. We'll be monitoring the Q&A questions as they come in or any comments. If it's applicable to the content and the subject, we'll address the question during the event. If not, we'll save it till the end. So with that, I'll turn it over to Adam.
All right. Thank you, Anthony, and thank you everyone for spending some time with us today. The topic I'm going to talk about, absorbable metals, is a really fascinating one. It's very broad and extensive, and I don't anticipate that you should come away with this having a full understanding of everything about absorbable metals. But my hope is that we'll get you at least an appreciation for what is out there, what's possible, start to know what questions to ask, and know if you want to begin working with these materials, how to work with us to get the materials that you need. So with that, let's dive in. And I would like to start by going through a brief history of implantable metals. The materials that have been used for implantable devices have changed and evolved over time. In the early 1900s, some plates and screw systems, mostly for orthopedics, were made with carbon steel, which of course is not corrosion resistant, and that led to some issues. But in the 1920s, stainless steels had begun to be invented and were becoming commercialized, and these are very predictable in the body, and so building devices out of stainless steels began to be common. And then in the 1950s, cobalt chrome alloys with better strength and toughness and corrosion resistance were discovered and began to be implemented. Then in the 60s and 70s, titanium alloys, especially in the orthopedic space, became very useful. And then in the 80s, big developments were in improving materials that were already existed, particularly the cobalt chrome materials. In the 1990s, nitinol, which is now a huge implantable material, was first introduced. But since nitinol was introduced, there haven't really been any change in classes of absorbable or of implantable metals used in medical devices. Plenty of refinements. The materials today are much better than the materials back then, but they're still of the same kind. And so there's good reasons for that. These materials that we have today are quite good. It's very difficult and expensive to use a new material when you can just pull from one that's already on the shelf. But what we would like to do is introduce a whole new class of materials, these being absorbable metals, as the next iteration of implantable metals. But what people a lot of times don't realize is that magnesium actually was some of the very first implantable materials used. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, you can find many case reports of surgeons implanting magnesium screws, magnesium plates to fix fractures. In many cases, they worked really well. In other cases, they did. These magnesium implants would degrade and absorb, but sometimes they didn't absorb very well. They could cause fractures and issues. And for the same reason, carbon steel was abandoned. Stainless steel became the dominant force. So there is, 100 years ago, a history of using absorbable metals. And today, that is what we're moving towards. And there are actually many devices on the market in the clinic being used that are based on magnesium, and they are absorbable. Most of the work is in Europe. So you see many of these CE marked devices. There's only one in the US FDA that has approval, an orthopedic device by BioRetech. And there are others in China and Korea and a few other jurisdictions. So there is activity going on. It's still relatively small, but the impact and the potential is growing. So what are absorbable metals? These are materials that are designed to corrode. And so by being designed to corrode, we are flipping the typical design paradigm on its head. We don't want materials that are incredibly corrosion resistant like stainless steel or cobalt chrome. We want them to corrode. We want to do that in a controlled way. And as they corrode, their byproducts need to be harmlessly absorbed into the body. By using these materials, you can develop transient implants that change over time. So bone screws or stents or staples or a whole host of different devices don't need to be there forever. They need to serve a mechanical function for a short time and then go away. When people are looking at absorbable metals, these are typically coming in one of 4 different nutrient metal classes: magnesium, iron, zinc, molybdenum. These are all metals that your body must have in some amounts to function. And we'll be talking about each of these materials in short order. So the mechanism that these degrade is by corrosion. So when these metals, which are not corrosion resistant, are implanted into the body, they're exposed to fluid, a very salty fluid, which is prone to corrosion attack. And so these base metals undergo an anodic cathodic reaction. They form metal oxide and hydroxide corrosion products. And then these products are what are absorbed into the body. And there's many examples that you can see of metals doing just this. I like to pull up this paper by Krauss, especially because it shows a few things. One, it shows the difference of alloying on the corrosion rate. So here's 2 different magnesium alloy pins that were implanted into rat femurs, and you can see how that progression occurs over time. So the magnesium alloy can make a big impact on how fast it degrades. Also, you can see that, yes, this metal was implanted, it was degraded, and after time, the bone had completely healed and recovered, and that metal was now gone. So conceptually, this is how it works. Another thing to point out is that you need to be aware of the different corrosion products that are occurring as they're degrading. You see these voids here, and these are residual hydrogen gas pockets. As magnesium degrades, it releases hydrogen gas, which isn't harmful as long as it's not in such an excessive amount. But this kind of illustrates how these materials do corrode, and then by corroding, they absorb into the body and leave no trace behind. At Fort Wayne Metals, we like to take a all material approach. We don't want to force our customers to use a particular material. We want to provide what is best for your application. So we've spent time working in all of these classes, in both magnesium, iron, zinc, and molybdenum. And we know that many devices require different forms to be able to be produced. So we make centerless ground and polished bar, wire, getting into sheet production. And then also we have our DFT composite platform where we can produce composite wires that layer different types of materials. And I'll talk about that in a little bit later. So when we look at the 4 different alloy classes, each of these have some unique advantages and disadvantages, and there could be good reasons to use any of them depending on what you're trying to do. Iron is nice because it's high strength. It's the basis of steel. It's easy to manufacture. It's highly ductile, many deformation mechanisms available. So anything that you can make out of steel, you can make out of an iron alloy that is degradable. The degradation rate tends to be slow, perhaps too slow for some applications. For instance, a bone screw made out of an iron alloy might be around for a decade or more, which kind of defeats the purpose of having an absorbable material. Zinc is unique among metals. It's a little odd to work with. The strength is relatively low. You need to be aware of some mechanical instability, but it is highly ductile with the right alloy. And so it's easy to form into different shapes. And then the degradation rate is moderate. It's faster than iron, it's slower than magnesium. And in some cases, it could be the right choice. Molybdenum is the latest of these classes to be introduced and considered. It's really unique in terms of its properties. It has very high strength, has high stiffness, so it's much stiffer than cobalt chrome, not quite as stiff as tungsten, but it's up there. And then also high radiopacity, which for thin devices guided by fluoroscopy is really critical. It's relatively easy to work with in certain circumstances, and it has a very slow and uniform degradation rate. So the degradation rate is probably a little bit slower than iron, but what's really impressive is how uniform it is. And then magnesium is where we have spent the bulk of our time by far. All the devices that I showed at the beginning of the slides are based on magnesium, and it has, really good benefits to using it as a material, but it does have some challenges. So the strength is relatively low compared to metals like titanium or cobalt chrome, but compared to absorbable polymers, it's quite high. It is radiolucent. The density of magnesium is similar to bone, and it's much less than most other metals. Magnesium is not as ductile as many materials, and so it can be challenging to manufacture with. And the degradation rate tends to be on the faster side. So you're trying to slow that down with alloying or coating or other strategies. So getting into a little more detail about iron-based materials, a very common alloying system within iron is iron alloyed with manganese. With enough manganese, the material becomes austenitic, so it is no longer magnetic, which is an advantage for MRI follow-up. And with the right processing, this iron 35 manganese material can have equivalent mechanical properties to 316L stainless steel. So it's very possible to have an absorbable metal with mechanical properties equivalent to what's used today. And as I said, iron has slow corrosion, but it is also prone to corrosion cracking. And so the overall degradation might be slow, but it can very localized have some pits and then some cracks, which cause the material to fragment. This, of course, is a big problem. And so we took on an effort to try to improve that. And what we found was that by adding nitrogen, we are able to reduce that tendency to crack. So you can see in this image, the top is without nitrogen and the bottom is with. And after a certain amount of time in a saline solution, the material with nitrogen had not yet cracked. But we don't actually eliminate the cracks. So Dr. Alex Oliver recently completed a PhD at the Mayo Clinic looking at some of our materials for absorbable flow diverter applications. And what he found was that this iron-manganese-nitrogen alloy was still prone to fragmentation and early degradation to the point where it didn't quite fully seal up aneurysms. So there's still some challenges with these iron materials. There are other iron alloys that we are looking at. We have a composite solution that builds off of this to address some of these shortcomings, and I'll discuss that in a little bit. Zinc, as I said, is kind of unique among materials. At room temperature, zinc can dynamically recrystallize. That means that the grains inside the metal can continually be reforming and growing. And so you can't get a lot of cold work into it, which we use in most metals to increase the strength. But with the right alloying contents, you can get to have some decently strong zinc alloys. Zinc lithium in particular is quite promising in terms of mechanical strength. But what I always caution people to be aware of is mechanical instability, for lack of a better term. So this image on the left, we took the same zinc magnesium alloy wire and we tested it at 3 different strain rates. So 1, 10, and 100% per minute. So all we're changing is the speed at which we are testing the wire. And you can see that just by varying the strain rate, you can have incredibly different tensile responses. So as you're designing a device, you need to have a good understanding of what your device is seeing compared to how you're testing the material. and also a small change in test temperature, whether it's at room temperature or at body temperature, can have a big impact on the actual mechanical strength. So that doesn't mean that zinc can't be used or can't be the right material for some applications. You just need to be aware of the specifics. So at Fort Wayne Metals, we have done, it's relatively limited amount of work compared to our work in magnesium or iron, but we have done quite a bit. And we can do custom melting of zinc alloys to your specifications and then convert them into a variety of product forms. Molybdenum was introduced as a absorbable material probably in about 2020, so not that long ago. And as an absorbable stent type material, it's really interesting. I mentioned that the degradation rate is quite low, so in some cases probably 20 to 50 microns per year. But what is really attractive is that uniformity of the degradation. So you can see in this image on the left that the initial circle is now still a circle. And even on this image on the right, the degradation layer thickness is quite uniform. Metals, as they degrade, tend to not do this. They tend to get very irregular. They'll become pitted or some other shapes. So the uniformity of this molybdenum corrosion can lead to pretty nice predictability. At Fort Wayne Metals, we haven't focused on the stainless ground bar products. The degradation rate of molybdenum is likely too slow to be useful in an orthopedic sense. But on the smaller side, so 40 thousandths to 1,000th of an inch or 1 millimeter down to 25 microns. And with our cold work processing, we're able to get some really nice mechanical properties out of pure molybdenum. So at the 80 micron size, we're at about 2,000 MPa or 300 KSI, depending on your preferred units. Compared to the iron-manganese-nitrogen, similar strength levels. But what I want to point out is the modulus difference. So the slope of this curve. Molybdenum is quite a bit stiffer than the iron manganese. And so this can be a good or bad thing depending on what you're trying to do. If you want to make a self-expanding braided stent, which relies on a lot of elasticity, this is actually a disadvantage. So the yield strain is reduced quite a bit compared to an iron manganese material. So it won't be able to open up as much. Also, when we get down to the 25 micron size, we can get to some incredible strength levels. So as a comparator here, our 35 NLT is a cobalt nickel chrome alloy used in many medical devices today. And it is a strong material. The molybdenum, when processed in the right way, can get in excess of 3 GPa in tensile strength with still good toughness. So this is quite a strong material. Depending on the application, it can be very attractive. Another benefit of using molybdenum is the radiopacity. So for stents in particular that need to be guided by fluoroscopy and rely on the X-ray absorption to see it, molybdenum offers some advantages. So if we look at wires of different materials, molybdenum compared to stainless steel is more than double the visibility. And while it's not as good as things like tungsten or gold or platinum or tantalum, it's not that far off. So you can get some very nice radiopacity by using molybdenum. And I'll talk about this in a little bit, but the combination of iron and molybdenum can actually give kind of the best of all worlds for certain instances. And then magnesium is what we have done most of our efforts focusing on. It is the most broadly applicable, and biologically it's the most favorable. So at Fort Wayne Metals, our aim is to provide the full product suite that we offer in other materials. So bars for customers that need to make orthopedic devices, wires for people that want to make stents or staples, and offer that in magnesium. And the way we do this is through custom alloy vacuum melting. So we have a small scale VIM for R&D type applications. And then we also have a large vacuum induction melter for up to 50 kilogram heats. We then take these ingots and extrude them through domestic partners, and then we bring them back into Fort Wayne Metals and begin our cold draw processing. We're kind of unique in the world in terms of cold drawing magnesium alloys. They're relatively difficult to do that, but by doing that, we're able to get some really nice properties and also get them into all the product forms needed to make these devices today. And so we've spent a lot of effort working on our cold draw processes to allow this. And so by doing that, we can produce centerless ground bar, we can produce wire, we can take these wires and bars and make functional forms and prototypes. Not that we want to do this at scale, but if we can help you get to some proof of concept devices to help move your projects along, we like to do that, whether it's cables or braids or any sort of device. We very often produce magnesium alloys to our customer specifications, but those are generally proprietary alloys and not available to the general public. But so to make alloys available for someone that doesn't have an alloy that they particularly want, they just want to do something with magnesium, we have developed 3 different alloys that have some different properties. Alloy ZXM100 is a all-nutrient metal material. It's a good all-purpose material that we think is very promising in orthopedic devices. Our alloy LZ21 is highly ductile, and we do have a patent on this material. And then alloy W22 is a magnesium alloy containing rare earths, which is a discussion I won't get into today, but it does have some pretty nice mechanical properties. To spend a little more time on our ZXM100 alloy, this is an alloy that is composed of magnesium, zinc, calcium, and manganese. These are all nutrient metals. There's nothing in here that is questionable in terms of its biocompatibility or toxicity. We don't have a patent on this material. It is, the composition is selected to avoid some patent landscape issues that are out there, which can be complicated. And so we do have freedom to operate with this material. It's the material that we've made the most of. We are working towards scale, but today we can produce bar products in the 2 to 6 millimeter size. We're working towards getting up to 15 millimeters in diameter. For the wire, we can go down to about 50 microns. We have made sheet out of this material several times, and we have in one case made tubing for those that want to laser cut stents through a third party. Last year, I presented a animal study where we implanted 2 millimeter pins in this material into sheep tibias, and I presented this at the ORS meeting. If afterwards you'd like me to send you this poster, I'd be very happy to. Just send me an email. Our LZ21 alloy is very similar to the ZXM100, except we add a small amount of lithium. Lithium, when added to magnesium, makes the magnesium very ductile. So for applications where you need that device to be plastically deformed while it's being deployed, that lithium can really help out. And so we do have a patent on this material, and we can produce it in the same forms that we can produce the ZXM100 material. I'll talk a little bit about the tubing. So several years ago, we conducted and presented a study with a couple other companies where we demonstrated a supply chain for anyone to get a fully laser cut stent. So we produced, we melted and produced some rod, which was extruded into tubing by a company called Complex Materials, and then laser cut and electropolished by a company called Nico. And so this LZ21 alloy, when that was subjected to this procedure, it had some really unique properties compared to some other materials, in particular W43, which is fairly commonly known today. The radial force of that device was higher than the W43, and the recoil, or how much that retracts after you remove the balloon, was lower, which is usually a trade-off that you have to make. So the LZ21, we think, could be a pretty interesting balloon expandable material. And then W22 is magnesium, yttrium, neodymium, and zinc. Again, we don't have a patent on this alloy. We are kind of similar to some existing materials, but we do have freedom to operate established. And so this material we can produce in centerless ground bar, again, on that smaller 2 to 6 millimeter side, wire down to 002. We've made quite a bit in that 100 micron diameter range or so. We can also produce the tubing. Sheet in this material is a little more difficult, and we haven't done that successfully yet. When you work with magnesium, one thing you may need to do is try to mitigate the rapid corrosion, especially if you're trying to make something small like a stent. And the first line of doing so is to use an alloy that has a low degradation rate. As I showed in that very early slide, magnesium alloys that have the wrong elements can have very rapid degradation rates. And so the alloy makes a big difference. Another factor that makes a big difference is the purity of the magnesium that is used. The impurities that can naturally come, like iron or nickel, can cause massive corrosion rates. So using highly pure materials can help to slow that down. Another way is to apply a coating. These can be conversion coatings, where you're taking some of the base magnesium material and converting it into something else, something like anodization or plasma electrolytic oxidation, or even a magnesium fluoride layer. We've done some work with all of these, and for certain applications, they can be quite effective. In other cases, you might need to apply a polymer. And so these could be things like polycaprolactone, PLLA, or other things. All the stents that are on the market today that I showed earlier, those have polymer jackets to help slow down that degradation rate. As a demonstration of how effective these polymers can be, these three images here are LZ21 wire at 300 micron diameter after immersion in a Hanks simulated body fluid for 7 days. The bare wire, you can see, has quite a bit of degradation. With a simple anodization layer, that degradation is reduced. With that polycaprolactone jacket, that degradation is almost eliminated. Now, polycaprolactone is quite slow degrading, and there are other polymers that might offer a better balance, and these are things that we continue to work on.
Adam, before you move to the next stage with magnesium, one question that I think applicable to the degradation that was posted in the chat is, do we have any data that would give us an overview of the different absorbable metals and metal combinations, including their degradation rates? So I know you're going to talk a little bit about combining, maybe in the future, combining the alloys that you mentioned, maybe with other implantable materials. But also, do we have any degradation data or degradation rate data?
Yeah, so what is the degradation rate is the key question that anyone wants to know when working with these materials. And the trouble is that it all depends on exactly where it's going in the body, how it's being used, and the relationship between the in vitro rate you might get and the in vivo rate that you see in the body can be quite different. So in short, no, I don't have one comprehensive comparison between the different materials saying, magnesium has this rate and zinc has this rate and iron has this rate. It's not quite that simple, unfortunately. We can help to point you to some resources to give relative degradation rates.
Okay, thank you. And the second part to that question is, has there been any studies out in the industry that would give us data regarding the echogenicity of in the body, which I think is an ability for like the tissues to reflect ultrasound waves, as these metals are dissolving in the body. Maybe the echogenicity changes over time. I haven't seen that data. I can't really comment, but just wondering if we've had any studies to understand those changes.
Yeah, we haven't partaken in any studies like that. I'm not too aware of people using general ultrasound for monitoring degradation, with the exception of intravascular ultrasound. So intravascular ultrasound, or IVUS, is something that's snaked through the vessels, and it can from within the blood vessel kind of monitor the status of the stents as they are degrading. That is actually quite effective at seeing how much metal is left. And there are quite a few papers, whether it's the Biotronic or now Teleflex device over time, or some of these other stent type devices. That is a decent way to see how much metal is left, because the metal does reflect the sound.
Thank you.
Yeah, keep the questions coming. So not too much left here. For notes on when working with magnesium, know that it machines easily. If you're trying to cut a screw, magnesium machines easier than even aluminum. However, you do want to avoid water-based cutting fluids, and actually machining it dry is best. Everyone knows that magnesium can burn, and the fire risk is real, but it is manageable. So for magnesium to ignite, it has to have oxygen and get to its melting temperature, which is about 650 degrees Celsius. So normal operations are not going to do that. But what can happen is that you can have a spark. And if that spark comes in contact with a small piece of magnesium, it can heat the magnesium up very rapidly. So when you're machining, if you have a big pile of chips, you want to make sure that is not exposed to sparks. Also know that magnesium in particular is sensitive to storage conditions, particularly humidity in the environment. So we always pack our magnesium materials with desiccants or in some cases vacuum sealing. So to conclude with magnesium, if you want to try to develop a stent, the mechanical properties can be workable. The biocompatibility is excellent. The degradation rate is a little fast, so you're probably going to need a coating, and the visibility is low, and so markers added onto the stent are very likely needed as well. For orthopedic devices, magnesium is the best choice. You just need to manage the hydrogen generation, but that is very manageable. And to reiterate, at Fort Wayne Metals, we have melt-to-wire capabilities. Several alloys we've developed are available to you. We can do custom alloys to your specifications as well. And so, I mentioned earlier that the iron and the molybdenum can be better together. And so using our DFT platform, we can get some really nice properties by combining these. And in particular, we see this for a braided stent type device, like a neurovascular flow diverter. In these materials, the individual wires are about 25 microns in diameter. Something like magnesium will be gone much too rapidly. To make a braided device that is self-expanding, we need the right balance of strength and elasticity. We need slow and uniform corrosion. And we also would like radiopacity so we can see where we're putting it. And if we look at the different classes that we've discussed today, none of them quite check all of the boxes. But if we combine iron, manganese, and molybdenum in our DFT platform, we believe that we can get the best of all worlds. Because these two materials are galvanically different, we get a programmed staged degradation. The iron manganese is the anode to the molybdenum's cathode. And so the iron manganese will degrade first before the molybdenum. And so that means that fragmentation issue that we mentioned earlier becomes mitigated by the molybdenum being there. The molybdenum will hold the wire together. By having the iron manganese on the outside and not the molybdenum, we get much better elasticity. So I showed the tensile modulus difference earlier and how that can impact how much elasticity is available. Well, the wire in bending is being mostly worked on the outside. So by having the iron manganese out there, we get a highly elastic, highly expandable device that also holds together. And with our DFT platform, it's typically just one core filament, but it doesn't have to be. And so we've done some trials with different core ratios, which can let you tune the overall degradation time. We can even make wires with multiple concentric layers so that you can get very programmed stage degradation. And then by producing these wires to, the 30 micron in this case, we can get mechanical properties that are almost 3 GPa in tensile strength, matching or exceeding currently used materials like 35 NLT. which is used in many flow diverter devices today. And then also radiopacity with that molybdenum incorporated is quite good. Many medical devices today use our DFTs where a platinum core is implanted so that you get better radiopacity. With the molybdenum, we can get the same advantage, all in an absorbable device. So we've done some basic work to try to understand, does this work like we think it does? So these very simple braids were immersed in saline solution. The iron manganese on its own fragmented very rapidly, even at 1 week, whereas the molybdenum stayed uniformly degrading as we would have expected. But what was nice to see was that these DFTs with the molybdenum cores also held together, even though the iron was degrading. So that does conceptually prove what we're after. These SEM images kind of show you what is happening a little bit more closely. The iron is degrading, the molybdenum is still there. Through a friend, Professor Guillory, we implanted some 100 micron wires into mice aortas out to 6 months. At 6 months, the iron manganese was meaningfully degraded, but still present, and the molybdenum had not yet degraded. As you get smaller, this time frame should shift faster, but we are working to still get some of that data. But we believe that this platform is pretty powerful for braided self-expanding devices. So if you want to know more about this, I'd encourage you to go look up this paper. It is open access. It has a lot of these images that I showed, but it's a really promising combination of strength and visibility and the ability to kind of program in what that degradation cascade looks like. We can quote prototype quantity orders today. It's not commercially launched yet, but it follows the very established DFT production path. And so we could get there in short order. We've filled some prototype orders as much as 60,000 feet. So if you're interested, we can definitely have that discussion. All right, so to wrap up absorbable metals in general, if you want to work in the neurovascular space, we would suggest that you look at the iron manganese DFT molybdenum family. If you're in the vascular space with larger cross sections, we would consider that same material or a magnesium with the right combination of coatings and markers. If you're in the surgical space, wanting to build a ligation clip or a hernia tack or something like that, magnesium is a very good selection, and zinc in the right circumstances could be as well. And then in the orthopedic space, we would suggest starting with magnesium-based alloys. And I do want to make sure you're aware that working with absorbable metals is not a small project. It's not a simple 6-month exercise to get a 510K through the FDA. There are really no predicates. So in almost all cases, you'll need some animal testing. In many cases, you'll need human clinical trials. This is a big undertaking, but it can work and it will work. So with enough commitment, you can be successful. One of the big challenges is establishing an in vitro in vivo correlation. There's much work on that in the field, trying to get in vitro methods that help to predict what happens in vivo. And the standards that are existing are relatively limited. They're mostly guidance. They're not prescriptive. It's still too early for that. But we have spent a lot of time in the last 6-7 years to make some guidance available. So I helped write ISO 20721. I would suggest you start reading that. And then there's a lot of work within ASTM to provide some guidance on different aspects of testing these materials. If you would like to learn more, I would suggest that you start by contacting your sales rep, and you can do that through our website. Also, feel free to reach out to me and Tom Hamilton, who kind of helps our R&D team manage our interactions with customers. I will also be at the ASTM FO4 meeting next week in Dallas, Texas. We have an hour-long meeting about absorbable metals. If you're there, I'd love to say hi. I'll also be at OMTech in Chicago in June talking about magnesium, and then the Biometal Conference in August is a fantastic conference all about absorbable metals, and we'll be presenting some work there. with that, I thank you for your time. And Anthony, if we have some other questions, I'd be glad to take those now.
Thank you, Adam. Very, very interesting topic. We do have one additional question in the chat, and that is, what is the smallest OD we can offer for Iron-Manganese-Nitrogen-DFT-Moly wire at this time?
So we have produced down to 25 micron diameter. I don't see why we couldn't go smaller. In many materials, we've gone down to 12 micron diameter, and it gets challenging, of course, but I think we could do that as well. And so if there's a specific request for smaller wire, we'd be glad to take that on.
Thank you, Adam. Can absorbable metals, Adam, be additively manufactured at this stage?
There are people looking at additive manufacturing of these materials. We haven't spent too much time of our own working there. So there are groups looking at 3D printing of powders of magnesium and zinc and iron and molybdenum. I think in some cases that could make sense. I don't think it ever makes sense to try to 3D print a stent or really even a screw. By doing the typical wrought processing where we're deforming the material and working it, you get such better mechanical properties and uniformity. But for certain instances where you're trying to make a porous structure as a bone filler, or perhaps in a spinal cage, there it could make sense to do some additive manufacturing. And there are people looking into that. We wouldn't necessarily be able to support you. We don't produce powders yet. We're looking into it. If you wanted to do a wire-based additive manufacturing route, we can certainly supply the wire.
And another question is the commercialization of these absorbable materials the same as, let's say, a permanent implant that does still go through the same process once it has an ASTM specification or an ISO specification assigned? Would a customer go through the same approval process that they would go through with a permanent implant?
That's going to be very case dependent. So it's all going to be depending on what the regulatory bodies want to see in terms of data. I hope that, you know, in the future, as many of these devices are on the market and we have a lot of history, that it becomes almost as simple as specifying an ASTM standard that calls out a particular magnesium alloy, and we all know that as long as you're abiding by that standard, you're going to get consistent performance. But we're not there today. Everything is going to be kind of unique to your device, how it's being used, how it's built, if you have a coating applied. So the time from development to commercialization for these materials will be a little bit longer than using a typical material today.
Thanks, Adam. Has there been work done with absorbable metals to combine with permanent implants? And if so, what are some of those examples?
Yeah, so it's a question we get asked fairly often. Can these magnesium alloys be combined with, say, titanium to make a partially degrading bone screw? And in some cases, yes. Probably the best case would be making a braided stent where some of the wires in the braid are absorbable and some are not. So for instance, a stent with partially nitinol wires to help expansion and partially iron-based materials for partial degradation. In those cases, it can work. Combining magnesium with other materials is a very risky proposition because of that galvanic relationship between them. So magnesium is the most anodic, and when you pair it with other materials, that degradation can become very rapid of the magnesium. So under certain circumstances, yes, you can combine these with permanent materials, but you want to be very cautious as you do that.
Okay. And that brings us maybe to another question that's similar in that, is it possible to accelerate the localized degradation in different ways?
It at a device level, if you wanted a certain spot to degrade first, there probably would be some strategies to do that by incorporating a different material right in that spot to drive that galvanic reaction. Otherwise, you could use geometry. So in general, the larger thickness something is, the longer it takes to degrade. So if you want a device to fracture in a certain spot, you can make that spot smaller, and then it'll naturally fail there first.
Sure. Maybe through the coating process also, as you alluded
yeah.
to earlier in the presentation.
Yeah, so if you applied a polymer coating to the whole device and then use a laser to selectively ablate certain sections, you could, yes, absolutely help that.
Okay. Maybe you have to follow up on this. I'm not sure. One question is, do we have strain rate? So zinc is strain rate dependent. So do we have a recommended strain rate to be used for testing zinc as a self-expanding stent?
That's a great question. I don't know that I can recommend a specific strain rate without knowing what you expect your device to see. So if you expect your device to have a certain strain rate, that's what I would recommend testing at. But really, to get the full picture, I would recommend testing at many strain rates so that you can kind of understand that curve of how it responds. The big issue with zinc is because it is so strain rate sensitive, a continual low load, like if it's in an artery and the artery is always pushing against it, it is prone to creep over time. And so I would also consider doing some creep testing. But no, I can't recommend a particular strain rate. We typically use 20% per minute, that's our standard here in the R&D department. But it really depends on your device. Zinc in a self-expanding application is really difficult, actually. In a balloon expanding, it could work out okay.
Yeah. On the flip side, can magnesium be used for a self-expanding stent?
Yes, absolutely. So we'll see how well it shows up in the camera. But this here is a scrap piece of a magnesium braid. So this is all magnesium wires, and we can pull it down tight to fit into a catheter, and then it will re-expand. So the strength of magnesium is not that high, but the elastic modulus is low. And so by combining those, you can still get good elasticity, over 1% elastic strain. And so it is possible to make a self-expanding magnesium stent.
One question about Moly, Adam, that was put in the chat is, can you talk a little bit about the Moly's biocompatibility? So it's on the list of degrading stents, but is it maybe go in a little bit more depth of the Moly's biocompatibility with the body?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that was my first concern when I heard about molybdenum as a degradable. In general, it's okay. There are a few studies, and I'd be happy to point the questioner to them if they just send me an email, looking at the biocompatibility. So locally, right at the implant, the molybdenum can be a little difficult for the endothelial cells, those cells lining the blood vessel, to attach and grow over it. That's another advantage of the iron shell on top of that, is that those cells love the iron, but they're not as friendly to the molybdenum. But then on a systemic basis, people have looked to see, as the molybdenum degrades, where does it go in the body? And so you'll measure molybdenum in the brain, in the kidneys, in the spleen. And the conclusion that seems to be the true one is that it gets excreted through the urine. So people have monitored the urine of rats as these molybdenum devices are degrading, and it is definitely getting excreted out of the urine. So with the molybdenum, it does seem that it is okay within a certain amount. So for a small device like a brain stent or a larger stent, that rate of molybdenum degradation is probably okay.
Thanks, Adam. Same. Another question on magnesium tube stent. The question was, can we make the actual tube stent, or do we use other companies, other customers that actually make the stent.
Yeah, so we wouldn't make the stent itself. We can source the tubing, we can melt the material and then get it made into tubing. But the actual laser cutting, we wouldn't do that. We would point you to someone like Miko, who's very good at that.
Yeah, thank you. Really great questions from the audience. I really appreciate the engagement. And again, just to clarify the presentation, it can be provided. We're asking if you do want a copy of the presentation to work through your assigned sales rep. The webinar recording itself will be posted on YouTube in short order, just like many of the others that over the last 6 months that were conducted by Fort Wayne Metals. And this is a really great subject. A couple of other questions that have come through, Adam, is one of the clarifications on the magnesium tube stent was laser cutting. I guess the question is, are magnesium stents laser cut from tube?
They certainly can be. And of the devices that are on the market in Europe, those stents are laser cut from tubing. Yes.
Okay. Question on Moly is, can the elasticity and strengths, how do those change with Moly with the variety of kind of processing parameters? Just not maybe as familiar with Moly as a material and its processability, and can you talk a little bit about maybe how do the properties change with a variety of processing parameters?
Sure. So I don't have any tensile curves handy for when the material is annealed, but we can anneal the molybdenum and get a lower strength, higher ductility condition. And so in that case, we would probably be in the 700 or 800 MPa yield and tensile strength, and the material will have the same modulus, but now the curve becomes much larger, and you'll get out to 20 or 30% elongation. The work hardening after yielding is relatively low, but in general, most of our work is focused on applying large amounts of cold work to the molybdenum to drive up the strength so that we can increase the elasticity. With the molybdenum, the best way to make it more elastic is to raise the yield strength. And to do that, we apply lots of cold work.
I see some of the data, Adam, on the graph on the left, that this starts to max out at about 2000 MPa. Is that correct?
Well,
I mean,
it's depending on the size and the process that we use to make it. So in this case, at this 80 micron diameter, we had a certain amount of cold work in it, and these are the properties that we get. For this 25 micron wire, we have more cold work in the material and we get more strength. We could probably make an 80 micron wire with higher strength if we applied more cold work to get there. And if a customer wants, that size with higher strength, we'd be very happy to take on a project to try to maximize that.
Okay. The nature of the question alluded to, how far we can put the how far we can kind of push Moly until you get to a level where you don't have a lot of ductility in it. I think the answer is we have some of that data, and it's dependent on the product form that we're talking about and how much cold work we can actually put into it.
Yeah, I would say this curve for the 25 micron is getting close to the limit.
Okay, great. There's one. Okay, I think that one question that came in is there an elastic magnesium? Sorry, maybe is the magnesium elastic after the tube laser cut?
Not particularly. So if you're trying to compare it to a nitinol stent where you can laser cut it and still have super elasticity, magnesium will not be that way. Typically for the for the laser cut magnesium stents, you are doing that for a balloon expandable device. So this would be more similar to a cobalt chrome or a stainless steel, where you want low elasticity so that as that balloon expands the stent, it doesn't spring back, it stays put. So magnesium for laser cut should be considered more along the lines of a cobalt chrome type device rather than nitinol.
Got it. Thank you. We have a couple more minutes for the audience. The one question on that same topic was, but they said we showed an elastic magnesium stent a while back in the presentation. That was the nature of the question.
So maybe it's this one. So that would be similar to this, the sample device that I have here. And so this is a wire braided stent. So this is not laser cut tubing. These are individual wires that are braided together, and we have that magnesium in a very different condition than what you would use for a laser cut stent.
Thank you for the clarification, Adam. Great questions. If there are any more, we're nearing the end of our time, and the question, the person that asked the question about the magnesium stent really appreciated the difference between the clarification between the magnesium stent cut, laser cut versus something braided from wire. Completely kind of two different conditions that could be had,
good.
from the result of processing.
Yeah, good clarification. Thank you.
Yeah. So if no more questions, we have a couple more minutes in case somebody has a question out there. Again, Adam, in the events that you'll be participating in that were listed on the final slide, are there specific topics that you'll be covering at those events?
So within the ASTM meeting, we have just recently published a couple of guidance documents, one about corrosion fatigue, and then another as a revision to a in vitro corrosion test where we now have a particular method. So those are done, and now we look to advance to the next thing. So one thing we'll be discussing is how do we improve the in vitro test method that we have established for the magnesium corrosion, and another will be coming up with some guidance on a standardized way to quantify the degradation. So those are the two topics there. At OMTech, I will be discussing our ZXM100 magnesium alloy in particular. We feel that that's a very strong candidate for many orthopedic applications, and at OMTech, that's the right outlet. At the Biometal Conference, I'll actually be talking about something that I didn't mention here. It's a new invention that we have about a different type of iron alloy with the molybdenum core that has very high work hardening that we think could be really good for balloon expandable stents. Yep.
Would you mind, Adam, just in case customers want to include maybe attending some of these events in their schedule, could you include the last slide just to show the three events that where some of these topics will be discussed?
Didn't realize that was off the screen, but yeah, here you go.
Yeah, so you have the May 6th in Dallas, the ASTM committee meeting, the OMTech meeting in Chicago in June, and then the Biometal Conference in Andalusia, Spain in August.
Yeah. If anyone's able to go, I'd love to meet you.
Yeah, and again, there's the Adam's email contact information as well as Tom Hamilton. One last question that came through that I think we can address quickly before we conclude, Adam, and that is moly or zinc, which one degrades faster in the body?
Yeah, zinc would degrade faster. So molybdenum is probably the slowest of these materials. It and iron are similar, but I would say molybdenum is probably the slowest, then iron, then zinc, then magnesium.
Thank you very much. This concludes the webinar with Fort Wayne Metals on absorbable materials. Adam, thank you so much for all your contributions. It's a very interesting topic, and I'm so glad to see Fort Wayne Metals advancing its innovation in this topic. So, any other questions that come through as we're finishing up here, I'll send those to Adam in case we can address those directly with any of the audience. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Anthony, and thank you everyone for your time.
Bye-bye.